What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Amongst Thieves. Directed by John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein, this film stars Chris Pine, Michelle Rodriguez, Justice Smith, Sophia, Lillis, Hugh Grant, Chloe Coleman, Daisy Head, and many more, and is based on the very popular role-playing game of the same name. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to the review for Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Amongst Thieves. Before we get too far into this, I just want to say a big thanks to you guys for clicking here on my video to hear my thoughts on the movie, as it feels like almost everybody has dropped a review for this movie already. There were a lot of early screenings for this movie, even at my theater last week, that I wasn't able to make due to work schedule, and I know so many people who got to see it via a mystery screening or some sort of press screening, and at this point all the major publications have dropped reviews, as well as all the big YouTubers. So the fact that you took time out of your day to click on my video, I really appreciate it. And so with full transparency right out of the gate, I do want to say that I am not somebody who has really played Dungeons and Dragons. I have watched the original film back in the day in theaters, which I don't remember loving, but I was a kid and I enjoyed parts about it for sure. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but outside of that, I've seen, maybe Critical Role online a couple of times. I've watched some videos of some people play it, and I've always had a lot of admiration for the passion, the creativity, and the excitement around this franchise. It's often kind of viewed for some as a very dweeby thing, but I do really love the amount of effort and creativity that goes into this game, and I've just always loved the passion people have behind it. So going into this, as somebody who hasn't played the game, I'm a huge fan of fantasy. If you guys have been watching the channel for a long time, fantasy and sci-fi are my favorite genres of all time. And so going into this movie, I was just looking forward to a fun, lighthearted, just big over-the-top fantasy film, and I'm happy to say that's exactly what we got here. If you've seen the trailers, you know what this film is all about. I won't bore you with the details or dive too deep into spoilers, but the base premise is we follow a group of thieves who once in the past did something that ended up putting power into the wrong people's hands, and now they must right those actions, and there's some more things that happen along the way, and I'll leave that to you going and exploring the film on your own, even though I will say that I think the trailers have shown a little too much of this film, specifically all the big set pieces, so it does kind of feel while you're watching this film like you're kind of checking the boxes of everything you remember seeing in the trailer. I feel like the trailers definitely showed a little bit too much, but I'm happy to say I still really enjoyed the film, and I found it to be a well-paced, fun action adventure film in a fantasy universe that I'm not really overly familiar with. I'm very curious to hear from fans. If you're a fan of the game, how did this feel for you as a fan of the game? Is this the world you visualize when you play the game? Because part of the fun of Dungeons and Dragons is the fact that you kind of create your own world in your head. There are these creatures and these rules, and there's a lore and mythology, of course, behind the names of all these various creatures and places, but of course you get to visualize it in your head in a certain way. And so some people might have a more serious take on Dungeons and Dragons in their head, and this movie's definitely going for something that's a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more fun, a bit more of a popcorn film than something like a Lord of the Rings. And I was completely happy with what we got here, because I found it to just be a good fun time. It breezed by. It never really felt like I was bored or like the film was dragging in any way, shape, or form. And when it comes down to just the progression of the narrative, though familiar at times and sometimes predictable, I ultimately found it to be really, really endearing and exciting to watch, with characters that I found myself getting attached to by the time we got to the end of the film. And then on a filmmaking level, I found this to be an incredibly well-made film. The cinematography, specifically through the action sequences, but just in general, I thought were really, really great. I love the costume design here. There is a fantastic use of practical effects over the course of this film, whether it be in the action, in the actual costumes, the animatronics, the monsters. There's so much about this film that's practical, and I was so pleased to see that, because if you've seen the trailers, it also shows that this film is CG heavy, and the CGI is something I've heard a lot of criticisms about from a lot of people. And while I do feel like this film definitely isn't as good CGI wise as it is practical effects wise, I do really feel like the CGI of the film very much fits the tone of the film. I've always been an advocate for CGI that maybe isn't super realistic or has a cartoony look, as long as it fits the visual style and tone of the film. And I think that this film perfectly had CGI that fit the tone of the film. It was light, it was silly, it was over the top, and even the practical effects at times really leaned into that. And I love seeing the practical effects. I mean, there are a lot of creature effects in this movie. There are a lot of costumes and monsters and different things like that that are practical, and I just felt like that added so much to the movie visually that I just absolutely adore. And the CGI, when utilized, was fun and vibrant and kind of cutesy to look at. I felt like this movie had a good balance of really great practical effects as well as some big over-the-top cartoony visuals. For some people that might not work, but for me, honestly, it's right up my alley. And again, I think that the tone of the film aligned with the CGI we were seeing, which made it all work for me. So overall, story-wise, character-wise, action-wise, visual-wise, camera work-wise, the score-wise, and even the emotion of the film, I ultimately found myself having a really good time at the movies. Is this going to be an award-winning cinematic experience of the year? Maybe not, but as far as just a good time at the theater with good performances and characters that you find yourself really latched onto, with great makeup effects and all the elements that make it movie magic, I ultimately found myself really into all that. Definitely some of the highlights here for sure are Chris Pine, who plays our main character. He's the, character who has to go probably through the biggest arc throughout the course of the film. And that was something I really latched onto as well, is while this is a silly, fun, over-the-top fantasy film, there is a lot of heart in this movie, and the most notable element and theme to take away from this film is the idea of letting go of the past and being able to move forward and live in the now. That's something that a lot of my friends will know I am currently going through in my life, as I tend to be somebody who lives in the past in my mind. I tend to cling on to past memories, what could have been, what should have been, what messed up, where I messed up. I'm a failure at this, I'm a failure at that, and a lot of times I get lost in those kind of things. So it was nice to see this movie that was, giving me this message that I felt like I really needed to hear right now, and see these characters go through this and realize that they have these pasts that they're holding on to, that they need to kind of relinquish and be able to live in the moment. And that's something I'm trying to learn to do myself. So I feel like because I'm going through that myself, the theme of this film really impacted me a lot more. Again, in this big, fun, silly, over-the-top action film that has incredible visuals and silly, big, fat dragons and different things like that. Overall, I found this to be a really good time. If you can't tell, I really do think that this is going to be a great entryway for a lot of people who don't want to play the game Dungeons and Dragons, but just maybe want to experience the world. I found myself really invested, and I really hope they actually make a sequel here. Again, I really enjoyed so much about how this film was made. It's right up my alley. If you're not really into fantasy, or you are into fantasy but maybe you don't like lighthearted fantasy that's a little bit more goofy, then maybe this won't be up your alley. But for somebody like myself, I just genuinely enjoyed this film. I found that it just knew what it was. It was entertaining throughout. It was very well paced. It was engaging. The characters really fun. Michelle Rodriguez is in this film as one of the main characters, and honestly, I think that this is one of my favorite performances from her as an actress, a character that I could really latch onto over the course of the film, which I feel made the experience overall really solid. And I definitely want to give a big shout out to Daisy Head, who plays the character Sophia, who's the main villain of this film. I thought that she had a really cool look over the course of the film, and I felt like she really leaned into this very sinister role. She isn't given an abundance to do outside of being the bad guy, but for the most part, I thought that she had a lot of fun in the role. And I think that, though this film is familiar, though there are elements about this that feel predictable, this was just a fun time, and I think this is a movie that I can definitely see myself revisiting at some point in the future, and a movie that I really hope we get a sequel to. So to all you Dungeons and Dragons fans, what did you guys think about this movie? How does this kind of hold up for you? Are there elements of this movie now that you might bring into your own personal games, or is this something that maybe didn't work for you? Whatever the case may be, whoever you are, if you're a fan or not, leave any and all comments down below. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.